All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Let's give it a couple more minutes, maybe not quite that long, maybe a minute or two, and then we'll go ahead and get started. And as we're waiting for a few more people to trickle in here, probably not everybody's first rodeo to using Zoom. Um, Keep in mind that there is a built-in chat section. So it's very tough and very rare to get, 50, 60 people on a call at one point who are all kind of like-minded, similar organizations with high aspirations and mission driven. So, being that nobody here is competitive with one another, and we're all kind of in the space for mission. I like to make these webinars as dynamic as we possibly can. So, if you have any questions or anything related to what we're talking about, or about the platform, or about me, please do toss them in there. I'll try my best to keep an eye on it and inject, answers or loop things in as we go. But if there's other elements, so obviously today's main topic, and again, we'll get into it in just a second, is really truthfully managing grants and how we measure impact. If there's things that you're doing, how you track things, things that you've seen work really well, maybe challenges that you faced, if you have any I don't want to say testimonials, but kind of if you've gone from maybe not tracking too many impact metrics and then incorporated that and how that's impacted your relationship with donors or for fundraising, would love to hear some of those success stories. And then that way, if there's other things on the call that people want to benefit from, we can kind of loop that in. So again, I'm obviously hosting it. I'm going to kind of go through a few slides here, but I'm happy to make this dynamic. And if there's other things that you guys want to talk about, or if you guys want to spur off discussions based on your feedback, by all means, we can do that. So let's give it another maybe 30 seconds to a minute, and then we'll get started. Okay, let's go ahead and get going. We have a few dozen people here today, so a pretty good turnout. It's an interesting topic, and it's one that just kind of set the stage here a little bit. And I'll give my quick, probably 30-second to 1 minute high level introduction, so that way we can kind of focus on the meat and potatoes here today. It's a follow-up discussion to a webinar that we had hosted. I believe it was last month in regards to like the federal funding freeze memo, obviously what had transpired and then kind of was drawn back, and then also now what's coming up in the news here shortly. And that was all around kind of like how sustainable can we make our programs when funding gets cut, or if we have to look at budgets, and if we rely on external factors, how do we make our programs so impactful that it's impossible to cut funding, as well as secure additional funding follow-ups? And so, we went through that webinar and we talked about kind of what happened, how we can maybe prevent that from happening in the future, and how we can kind of self-reflect on our programs. The key takeaway there is that we have to have really clear data-driven metrics on the impacts that our programs are having on three parties, right? One is the grantees or the applicants themselves. And I'm going to try to speak kind of broadly today because I do know there's some scholarship providers here as well. Number two is from an organizational perspective. We all have a mission, we all have a vision. How do we align our programs with those mission visions, and then being able to kind of show proof in the pudding that we're actually backing it up? And then the third one, and I guess I would say third and fourth, is going to be both to your community and to your donors and to your sponsors, right? How do we get ROI and things like that from these programs? So we decided to host this webinar where we're going to cover kind of three things. Number one is like the obvious importance of measuring impact. I just kind of at a high level spoke about that. Number two is some of the common challenges that I personally see. There very well maybe way more challenges that are in the space. So if you guys have insights, tell me. And then where I want to spend the bulk of our conversation, I try to keep these to about a 30-minute or so conversation, especially late afternoons. That way, if we want to open up a Q&A or let you guys inject, you can, is real kind of next step actionable insights and building your own kind of impact framework that, excuse me, dashboards and reporting mechanisms that you can kind of break into two phases. One that you can implement like literally right now, starting tomorrow. And then the other is maybe like a long-term aspiration that we want to work towards. Now, for some of you on the call that might be have been doing grants for many, many years, or you're 5 years into a program, you're in a fortunate position where you have potentially some existing data and ways to start to track long-term impact that for some of us who are either starting now or we have no kind of mechanisms in place, it's going to be very challenging, which is an okay thing. So I'll say this many times throughout today's conversation that success doesn't happen overnight. And so it's all about kind of forward thinking. How do we design these programs with like 5, 6, 7 years down the road? Especially for, I'm going to make up an example here. If you're part of like the scientific community and you're providing grants to like cancer research, like you're not going to get immediate ROI or immediate impact reporting in like 6 months from now. And so how do we like look 5 years from now and what do we want to be in that type of time frame? So with all that said, very, very, very quickly, kind of my quick introduction. So, my name is Kyle. I'm the CEO here at Reviewr. Been around since literally day one when we started the company. We named the company Reviewr because that was the life that we actually lived. So, to put that into perspective, we've gone through kind of that double life where we started as a pure volunteer as part of a review committee for things like grants and for scholarship programs. And that was way back and I'm, about 10 years ago when platforms like Reviewr didn't exist. And so we'll kind of get into what we do. We're a full-blown grant management software from start to finish. But way back then, these programs were done through literally paper. So I'm not making this up. We would have times where there were hundreds of binders physically mailed to our doorstep, and we're handwriting notes and feedback and scores, and we're physically mailing it back in. And as a volunteer specifically, obviously we don't love heavy physical binders, but at least it was centralized. For those that still may live in that world, my heart goes out to you. I understand from an operational perspective the kind of painstaking processes, right, to compile the information, make copies, and get it to us and put us as a volunteer in a position for success. The main reason why we built the company, though, was fast forwarding a few years. So a very typical kind of grant maker or scholarship making organization understands the need to try to streamline operations for two main purposes. One is obviously from a staff perspective. You guys have these lofty goals, vision, mission. How do you spend less time on like the nitty gritty of downloading documents and emails and spreadsheets and more so focusing on your mission? But equally, if not more important, it's like you make up a small fraction of the program itself. Your applicants, your volunteers, your board members, your donors, your stakeholders, they make up a significantly greater percentage. So the idea is like, how do we elevate the experience? And that's the key word their experience for them. And so we started to see, built-in web forms, emails, Google Drive links, all these other vendors and kind of platforms being looped together to try to run a grant program. But what ended up happening is you spend way more time downloading and exporting. From a volunteer review perspective, we're being told to go download all these folders, go fill out these spreadsheets, upload it back in. And a couple of problematic things started happening. Number one is we saw a disconnect in data. That's going to be a reoccurring trend here as we get into some of the challenges with impact tracking, is that as we download, export, recompile, things got lost. And so on top of that, maybe sometimes things would go to spam filters, or if you ran like the entire grant cycle and you actually are doing impact tracking, and you've got your applicants or your grantees submitting like deliverables to you via email, it's not uncommon to see things go to spam. And so we saw firsthand, these review processes take place, checks were cut, just to find months later that there were like deserving applicants and candidates that were sitting in a spam filter that never even got included in the initial review, right? So compliance becomes a problem, operations is a problem, it's a bad look on our donors. So we built Reviewr as an online platform really to run like the entire life cycle or experience of these grants from start to finish. So that's kind of my really quick high level introduction. I'm very, very fortunate to not just have been doing this now for over a decade, but I've witnessed firsthand, thousands and thousands of grants, many of which are highly successful, who bring to us kind of emerging trends, best practices, insights that as a very educational based company, we love to digest that, keep an ear on the ground of what's going on, and then turn that into resources for you guys, right? So obviously, if you ever want to explore using a Reviewr, I'd love to have that conversation. But my goal primarily and first and foremost is to try to share any insights I can that you can take and elevate your programs with or without Reviewr. So if there's one small takeaway that you can take from today that you can apply, then I think we walk away as a success. I am recording this, so I'm going to send a follow-up message after this here, probably not today, but sometime in the next day or two, with some resources as well as some assets that we're going to kind of look at here in just a minute. Everything that we look at least that are related to Reviewr. So anybody who decides to work with us in the next month, not launch your program, but works with us the next month, is going to be included with all these resources, right? So everything we're going to talk about will be included with all of your licenses. Typically speaking, these would be add-ons. So keep that in mind. I want to get that out of the way now just because we are going to share this recording out and I'm going to exclude that from it. So with all that said, let's get into the meat and potatoes of today's conversation. So again, this goes way back to the federal funding freeze when I basically made the comment on a webinar that said, look, like and I'm going to jump right ahead to it. The program, your program survival is 100% dictated by your ability to track and manage the impact that you're having. And it's a very impactful statement. It may be a little bit polarizing, but I think it's also very, very true. Every one of us is here because we're a mission-driven organization. We're not just giving out money for the sake of it, right? We're not a charity. We're not a lottery. There's people who are coming to you seeking funding for life-changing opportunities. It's critical for us to be able to take a step back and say, look, with the funds that we're distributing, with our donors and with our sponsors, are we fulfilling our organizational mission? And are we truthfully having impact on these people? And if not, how do we kind of course correct moving forward? And I think there's a couple things that come into play there, and we'll kind of get into some of the metrics I think are worth tracking. I think so often we focus on like the data portion of things, right? And in order for you to kind of go through a proper impact tracking, reporting, dashboarding concept, data is at its core the most critical component, right? Without having the data as well as the self-reporting from the grantees, you physically cannot measure impact. Like it's an all or nothing type of thing. With that said, the success of your grantees can oftentimes be course corrected. So, how do we start to uncover roadblocks or barriers or additional fundings that they need without, talking with them and starting to collect some of that information? So, just to be very clear, like I think it's really important that while everything is data centric, especially with impact reporting, we need to look at these programs through the eye of what they really are. It's not widgets and data and exports and spreadsheets. These are real people and or organizations. And so everything that we do, all the structure of these campaigns has to have that at its forefront, right? How do we deal with people? So, I talked a little bit about like the program survival and kind of bear with me here. I'm still letting people in as I'm talking. I'm a father of two. I'm short on sleep, so I can't do too much at one time. But um, it's a very data-driven world. And so from a philanthropy perspective, like we have to have the raw tangible metrics to back up what we say that we're doing. Um, from a donor perspective, either from existing donors and or sponsors, or as you fundraise to find additional donors, no longer are they looking for like the testimonials, although those are great to have, or like the emotional statements that we have of like how we've changed people's lives. They really are looking for like raw dashboards and like an ROI of, if I cut you a check for cancer research or for helping this organization, like how can you prove to me that my funds are going to actually fulfill that organization's mission? And without having like this data in our back pocket, we're kind of left going in blind. I talked a little bit about from a donor relation perspective, like some of the challenges that we have with them. We live in a time now where as federal funding is in question, right? That's kind of how we started this conversation. There is an influx of funds available out there from other types of entities. I'm trying to avoid, this being a political conversation because that was the goal from the last one. But you've got a lot of corporations and corporate partners who are shifting their priorities, and their corporate social responsibility campaigns are absolutely still thriving. It's critical for them themselves, it's for employee retention and engagement. And so, like from a CSR perspective, not only are they looking to obviously fund insightful programs, but they have their own obligation to their own staff, their own teams, their own stakeholders. And so, for them to be able to kind of work with you as a partner, they need to bring back from you not just insights, but then take those insights back to their team to show that it was a worthwhile investment. So, I'm going to kind of pause there on some of the why measuring impact is essential. I think, since you're on the call today, we can all agree, right, that we have to be able to show proof that these programs are changing people's lives. With that said, it's obviously significantly more challenging than just saying that. So what's at risk? I'm not going to go through this whole list. I'll share out the slide deck here after, and you can kind of read through those. But not just lost funding, but also follow-up funding and fundraising, opportunity growth. The one thing on here that I'll skip to is mission and vision disconnect. I think sometimes we kind of get very siloed, right? And so how do we tie back in? Like, why are we running these programs? Like the why is absolutely critical. And the reason why I bring that up is when we get into like how to properly track impact, there's a lot of like follow-up data that we're going to need from grantees, but that all funnels right back to the initial application that people are submitting to you. And that application has to align right with what your mission's all about. So we'll kind of dive a bit deeper into some of those things. Why is measuring impact so challenging? So for me, I think you can summarize this in kind of two separate categories. One is going to be like systematic challenges, and the other is kind of like just like from a methodological perspective, like the many different kind of ideas we have or how we want to measure it. So from a system perspective, this is kind of going back to like the whole concept of data. And you really can't like overemphasize this without proper ongoing data collection from grantees. Everything that we look at today is impossible to do. And so, number one is like a lack of integrated systems. Um, that kind of goes hand in hand with a process fragmentation. So, if we're going to ask our grantees to come back to you guys on a very specific timeline, 6 months post grant, 1 year, 2 years, whatever that timeline looks like for you, you absolutely have to have a system in place for them to go, especially if it's a reoccurring thing. They can't be changing processes midway through. We can't have data living in your CRMs, a system like Reviewr, emails, and spreadsheets. It really has to be all kind of interconnected. Think about it from this perspective. If you have a grantee, the idea is that they're going to build a persona that's going to continue to grow and grow and grow. And for you to properly measure impact and do reporting, you have to be able to pull all of the information from the persona. So this really does start day number one with applications, right? I, as a grantee, am going to submit some type of funding application. It could be an LOI, it could be an LOI plus application. Um, file uploads, tax documentation, communication, judging and scoring processes. That's kind of like at the very start of it, what a profile looks like. And then ongoing, every time that they submit to you guys a receipt or a post-grant deliverable follow-up or a survey or an annual review, excuse me, that has to live with the initial profile because when you go to generate reports, it is physically impossible, right, to run reports out of multiple different systems, especially if those systems are physical paper or spreadsheets, and then recompile them together. You will spend so much time and energy trying to generate reports just to find out that it's not going to actually provide you any value. So we can kind of lump those two buckets together as A, lack of systems, and B, fragmentation amongst those systems. Um, the third piece of that is insufficient planning. And so I know I'm running through this relatively quickly just so I can kind of show you some things. But from a planning perspective, I mentioned beforehand that everything starts day one. So you have a mission and vision. I've said this now numerous times. When you collect grant applications, you basically are asking the grantee to submit to you deliverables that back up how those funds are going to fulfill a project that aligns with your mission and vision. And it seems very, very simple, but you can have like an application intake process and then 1 year from now ask the grantees to submit a bunch of other deliverables that don't correspond with what they initially submitted. And to be very clear, like this could be as simple as saying like, if you apply for this grant, what are you going to use it for? Ask them, how are you going to be held accountable? What are the key insights that you initially are going to be tracking yourself? How sustainable is this? And then as they go to do post-grant tracking and deliverable reports, they're basically providing updates on what they already told you that they would be tracking off of. So it does kind of map linear and it grows in segments together. Without planning for the future, how you want to report 5 years from now actually impacts how you create your applications now. So I'm not going to get too deep into applications, but that's kind of where I wanted to start with. The second piece of this is purely from a resource perspective, right? Obviously, leveraging platforms and tools and systems can significantly help you, and that's kind of the goal here today. But the number one barrier for proper impact tracking and reporting is time, right? Time, money, as well as team buy-in. And so, obviously, how do you spend less time on manual work, and that way you can focus your time on what matters most, and that would be in this case the impact reporting. So that's some of the systematic challenges. And so hypothetically, if you have all those in place and you're now doing impact tracking, this is the second kind of challenge that we often run into. And it's a kind of the proper way of doing impact tracking. So a lot of organizations have no real follow-up or meaningful reporting mechanisms. They basically say, here's our grant applications. We're going to go through a selection process. We're going to cut checks, and maybe that's it. Or we say, hey, you know what? In 1 year, can you just like give us a high level overview of like how it went, right? But there's no real mechanism in place that kind of aligns that with the proof of the program. The other one on top of that is anecdotal evidence. And so what I'm saying by that is like very emotional responses. Without having a metric-driven program, we rely on what people tell us. And a lot of times what they tell us is emotional, and it may not actually be backed up by the facts. And so we have to, instead of relying solely on the success stories, we want to focus more on like what the data actually tells us. One thing I want to avoid doing here, and I want to be very clear on this one, is making this process overly complex. Um, I think far too often we kind of get way too deep in the weeds and say, hey, we want these really crazy dashboards and we want to be able to track this and this and this and that. And we don't really kind of think through like, well, okay, that's great and all, but how are we going to get to that point? And we either A, spend a whole bunch of time, money, and energy trying to get to that point, and then we never actually do anything. Or B, it's just overly complex. There's a high barrier for your grantees. And so even though you have these great processes in place, you never have a mechanism in place for the grantees to report back to you guys, right? Because it's way too much of an energy lift for them. And the last piece of this I'm going to jump to is inconsistent collection, right? You've got a grant making process, you're awarding funds, you've got grantees. Every one of them has to have a very similar kind of grant reporting mechanism in place. From a data reporting perspective, it's super, super challenging to generate reports when the data is siloed and or looks different from one another. So if you got three different organizations that you funded, each of those three should have a very similar, if not identical template that they submit to you guys for program growth, as you start to audit your programs and start to make changes and move forward, it's also very challenging when you have people kind of on their own reporting timelines, doing their own kind of reporting metrics. And so, you don't want to be pulling too many different levers at one time. So having consistency in a very simplified, streamlined process is how we're going to make all this realistic. So with all that said, the main thing I want to talk about today is like, how do you actually build your impact framework? This is relatively challenging. Knowing the demographic on today's call, there's a lot of different types of organizations here. And at the end of the day, like your own kind of grant reporting templates, how you collect your data, what you want to report back on is going to be different for every single one of you. Now, how you collect that information is going to be the same. And that's what I want to focus on. I'll give you some high level examples. I try to create some type of like impact tracking forms for you guys. I'll share those out that can be leveraged as like a template to build off of. But keeping in mind that like your baseline and how you measure impact has to correlate to your mission and vision. Unless I'm missing something and every one of you on the call today is from the same company, that means every one of you is going to have your own processes, and that's totally fine. So I want to break this into two phases. So phase number one, I'll kind of jump around here a little bit, is kind of building the foundation. And these are kind of like immediate things that you can do right away. And then the other one's is far more complex. And it's like, how do we look 3, 5, 7, 10 years from now and figure out like what type of data do we want to be collecting to really measure impact? Um, so we're kind of at the point now where the American Rescue Plan, for those of you here in the States, ARPA grants are kind of wrapping up, right? And that's a long-term play as a 4.5 or 5 year grant program. And so success again doesn't happen overnight. So for many of them, they're trying to really measure the impact that those grants had on local communities, job placement, growth of communities, retention rates. And again, like you can't get that in 2 years from now. And so for them, they had to be very, very forward thinking, understanding that they're building a process that's going to continue to grow and grow and grow like a snowball. And then 5 years from now, when they go to publish their report, they have all the tools that they have in place now to be able to properly measure impact. So I want you guys to kind of get to the point where you can look, 10 years from now, like what do we want our programs to stand for? What impact do we want to have? Start there and then start to work backwards. Again, understanding that unless you have, 20 years of data or 10 years of data that you can like upload into a system to kind of generate this for you, that you may not be there now. And that's absolutely fine. So I'm going to go back to phase one. And there's actually two components here. So phase number one, component number one, is really kind of establishing a baseline, and it's almost like an agreement with your grantees. So for most organizations, as you go through a grant making process, you have the grantees, right, accept terms, they acknowledge it. It's called like a grant acceptance packet. Oftentimes, those grant acceptance packets include where the checks are going to be cut, what the reporting requirements are going to look like, all that kind of fun stuff. The one thing that I think we often forget there is setting the expectation moving forward. So as a grantee, I need from you these three, these four, these five things, and here's what I'm going to need them by. And really, it's like a commitment from them to you that they're going to fulfill those obligations. And so part of like, I think a really well-structured acceptance packet is laying out like what are these things that you're going to need from them, setting the expectations that if I cut you a check, like you got to help me out as well because we have to be able to for the next cohort of grantees measure impact. and then having them actually sign off on it and potentially impact the future funding, right? So if it's like a renewable grant or if it's a triage grant where they get funds every single year, like it's okay to say like, hey, until you fulfill your obligations, like we're not going to do the follow-up funding, right? It's part of their contract with you guys. So let's kind of take a really quick look at what that would look like. I uploaded this example here, which unfortunately here's an opening. There we go. This is obviously quite ugly. By no means is this what you're going to get working with Reviewr. I'm going to share out here in the next day or two individual documents that you literally can take and plug into your program and then refine them to make them unique to you. So number one is like, what does a template grant acceptance packet look like? At least within Reviewr, a lot of this is going to get pre-populated by their grant applications, right? Like who are you, your tax IDs, contact information, how much is it for, right? How much is it, what's the total budget look like? How much are you getting funded for now? What is the period? So for example, like is it a grant that you're going to get funded every year for the next 4 years, right? So it's almost like the contract. What are the focus areas? And then really kind of getting deeper into it, you have your payment methods, all the things that you guys absolutely need from like a pure accounting perspective, payment schedules, et cetera. And then it gets into like what I talked about earlier, which is, okay, so moving forward, like we need you to submit a quarterly progress report, annual report, and then a final grant report. So by signing off on this, you agree that you're going to submit these things from us. And then in order for you to build those reports, the quarterly reports, the annual reports, the final ones, like what metrics are they going to be tracking? How are they going to define success? Like basically, like how can we hold you accountable? And the reason why I think this is extremely important is it ties into number two, which is your quarterly progress reports. So if I go back over here, so just a little teaser, this is where I want you, to get you guys is to like these full-blown dashboards with like all the data at your fingertips. But going back to my presentation here, the short-term impact metrics. So in a very short timeline, 3 months, 6 months, not a lot's going to happen. Again, success doesn't happen overnight. What does happen overnight is failure. And that's a very blunt statement. I want to repeat that. Success doesn't happen overnight, but failure does. What I mean by that is it's Mike Tyson's famous quote of like, everybody has a plan until you get hit, right? And so you implement these processes, you fund organizations, they start to kind of go off and do their thing, and then circumstances change, right? The economic environment changes, the political environment changes, they've got staff turnover, they run into obstacles, and without clear visibility on what's happening, 1 year from now when they do their grant reports and they come back to you and they basically are able to show zero actual tangible benefits, or they say, hey, you know what, we blew through that fund, we need more money because we still have this big lofty mission. We wasted a whole year there. So this is not a impact reporting element and there's no metrics here. What we're really trying to do from a short-term impact report, if I go back to this, is to get a snapshot of what's happening right now. How can we uncover some of these challenges that they're facing? That way, if we can course correct, provide them resources, mentorship, connect them with other community members, other organizations, we can do so now. So it really is as simple as saying like, hey, like what is the timeline? Like what's your grant reporting period? Is it Q1, 2, 3, et cetera? Do you have any updated records that you want to share with us, tax documents? Summarize over the last 6 months, like what you've done. By now, there should be some very clear traction that you've had. You have some type of timeline for your project. Are you on or off track? If no, tell us a bit more why. Have you reached any milestones up until this point? Again, a lot of these are going to be tied back to their self-reporting that they told you that they want to be held accountable against. And then it really kind of gets into like sharing success stories. You stated this happened. Like, what's the discrepancy behind there? And that way, you guys can really start to uncover very, very early on. I don't want to say problem children, but getting ahead of potential barriers in the future, right? So if somebody comes in here and says, "Yeah, you know what? Like, we haven't done much in the last 6 months because of the current political environment or the current economic environment. This happened to us, and we're kind of at a standstill, right?" That's a big problem that you need to be aware of. So stage number one is purely getting a pulse of like what is happening, boots on the ground, so you can build a plan. It's also a way for you to get them to report back to you like what is the next quarter's plan? Because one thing you can't avoid happening is like doing the same thing over and over again is going to result in the same results, right? So if you have these stated goals and these kind of milestones and you're off track, like what's your plan to get back on track? So these are all self-reported. It's a way for you then to provide coaching, mentorship, and guidance to get them off to the next level. So That's your very, very short term. I think these are things that you can take and apply right now. I think that reporting template that I just talked about is extremely valuable in kind of the current landscape that we're in. So that brings us then to the next piece, which I also think you can do almost right away, which is annual reporting. So if I go back here to the next slide, this is, I think, where things start to get a bit more powerful and exciting for you guys because after a year, or it's going to be relatable to like the term of the project, right? So if it's like a 6 year project, like this may be done every single year for the next 3 years. But it's a lot more metric driven. So it's like completion rates of your projects. Like you have all these different milestones, like which ones are done, which ones are not done. If there's any like actual tangible metrics such as like sustainability or community impact or job growth, whatever the goal of that grant was. Again, this is me trying to speak very broadly because every one of you does a different type of grant. That's where the data starts to come into play. And then from there, we kind of get into like the very long-term metrics, right? So like how sustainable was this? Was follow-up funding needed? Are there advancements that require more funding? How have you impacted policies or organizations or people, right? Whatever it might be. And this is also where reporting becomes very, very challenging because now instead of having people submit and apply, you go through review and selection and you get one deliverable. You're now, 4 years from now, and you literally, so going back to like the ARPA grants, we work with a city here in the United States where literally once per month for 4.5 years, the grantees had to fill out an impact report. So like literally once a month for 4.5 years, those grantees had to submit some type of report. And then 6 years from now, all that data gets summarized into a final report. So I am going to come back to this here just a little bit on practical guidance on actually doing impact reporting. So again, it's all about the journey. So acceptance packets, quarterly check-ins, annual reports, post-project completion reports, and then the post-grant follow-ups. So I've already kind of run through all these example templates. Again, to be very clear, going back to this example, I am going to send over every single one of these. So that way, if you want to take them and literally use them copy for copy, by all means you can. If not, you can start to modify them and make them unique to you. But this is the most critical component here is every single data point that we're going over. So reporting on final results, number of people directly impacted, demographic breakdowns, significant accomplishments. Every single one of those is going to funnel into a dashboard. And that dashboard in itself is what you can then package up and either publicly display to your community and to your stakeholders. It's what you can use as like a pitch deck to go achieve additional funding. It's what you send to your donors instead of saying, hey, it was a great quarter. Here's some of the cool things we did. It's not just, hey, it was a great quarter. Here's real tangible metrics of the great things that we did. So what does that look like? And then I'm going to kind of pause for question and answer. My goal is to get every single one of you onto a dashboard that looks something like this. Now, to be clear, this right here isn't fully Reviewr. So the idea is to be able to visualize your data. So if you are using Reviewr, what we're able to do is automatically and for every single one of your grantees, roll up data and aggregate it for you so you can get these dashboards with like literally zero admin time. All the work comes from the applicants. So before I show you this, how do we get to this point? So in Reviewr, I pulled an example here. So I got Michael Scott. Michael is a grantee. And basically what we're looking at is Michael's profile. So obviously I'm not going to show you the entire platform today. That's not my goal. So what we've already done is we've already collected grant applications. In fact, that's what we're looking at here. We've already gone through review. We've gone through selection processes. We've scored people. We've vetted them. And then we basically get this profile. So here's all of Michael's initial information. What's going to happen, and on top of that, we have all of our file uploads that live here, et cetera. So what's going to happen is there is a timeline, and Michael will have to come back into ideally Reviewr. And this is why obviously doing this through paper and through emails and through spreadsheets is why grant reporting impact is almost impossible because there has to be a centralized place to store this. So Michael comes back into his or her profile. They go to a section, what I call supplemental forms. And I've got quite a few of them here. And all he or she is going to be doing on those predefined timelines that he or she or their organization agreed to is going to click add new. And they're going to pick what they're adding, right? So there's a lot of examples here. It could be going back to this example. It's basically going to be they're adding their grant acceptance form. And then maybe like 1 year later, they're going to pick quarterly progress report, or I should say like 4 months later. And then 1 year later, they're going to do their annual report. And they basically, on a schedule, come back into the system, pick what they want to fill out, and then they let me just go ahead and open this. I'm trying to do this backwards for you guys. Let's just go ahead and edit this one. They just fill it out directly in Reviewr. So a lot of this is going to be preloaded. So like their tax ID numbers, their mission, their vision. A lot of these are going to be required fields. So I really can't show you this to you too much, but it really is as simple as them filling out a bunch of stuff in one centralized place. So there's like a super low barrier, very, very simple for them to do. All we need them to do is actually physically do it. And then once they kind of progress on, they fill it out in one system, right? So project summary, details, how does this align with your mission and vision? Upload a current budget. Do you need any additional funding? How are the funds used? All of these things, again, are listed in this document. And then basically, once they submit this, Michael's profile or the grantees is going to grow and grow and grow. So what you're going to see here is annual report, acceptance packet, quarterly reports. And then for you guys, you can view that on the fly by just simply clicking view, and then boom, the data shows up. But since it's all leveraged in one centralized hub, in real time, all of this data gets aggregated and gets posted to your impact dashboards. So I hosted a webinar very similar to this for scholarship providers. So I already have this kind of pulled up. So what you'd have to do very manually, right, if you were not using Reviewr, is plug in all of your metrics, right? So these are obviously just high level examples, right? So you're plugging in metrics. And then you click generate dashboard and you start to get all of these key milestones. So again, in Reviewr, you wouldn't have to worry about publishing your own metrics. This would happen on its own. So you'd be able to kind of say, hey, we've got a 3-to-1 applicant to recipient ratio. We awarded, $12,000 per grantee. Each one of them has a completion rate, persistence rates, career alignment, whatever metrics that you want to track are. And then what you basically can do then is ship this off to your board members, to your stakeholders, to your community. You can publish it online and or keep it internally. But when you go to fundraise or if you go back to your donors and say, hey, 2025 wrapped up. Here's a snapshot of what we've done. We have 87 different grants currently going on. We have funded $4.25 million. Our retention rate is at X%. Here's a breakdown on the type of projects that we have, healthcare, biotech. Again, I'm making up examples because you guys are all in very different industries, right? But you can kind of give a breakdown of like the different demographic details of your grantees. You can kind of go through your objections. So like we have 92% of people have already completed it successfully. 86% of them met their objectives. 78% met the timelines they talked about. 89% were within budget. Right now, we've utilized 91% of our funds, which obviously is a leading indicator for more fundraising. Here's the different quarterly milestones that you have. And then obviously, this is the section for like the long-term impact where I get really excited about is, because of the $12,000 grant, I'm making up numbers that we gave XYZ organization that directly benefited, 28,000 people. It created 142 jobs, 7 policies were changed because of it. Here's the impact by category, all that kind of fun stuff. So I'm going to pause there again. What I'm trying to do is visualize like the difference between saying, hey, we've got a $1 million grant. We've used 62% of the funds, and here's like a high level overview of the type of projects we funded. It's like you can get really deep into the weeds of not just the funds that you provided, but the real impact that that had on both individuals' lives, organizational lives, and the community itself. So every metric that you see here is controllable by you. And this again kind of comes full circle where this has to align with A, your mission and vision, B, the application that you initially had them fill out, and then C, all the ongoing data collection. So you can kind of see how it does kind of go hand in hand where it just kind of builds off of the application and builds and builds and builds. And then, 10 years from now, you got all this incredible data at your fingertips where you can be able to build these dashboards out. So um, I ran 10 minutes long. So I want to pause there for not just questions about, potentially review or what we talked about, but really things that you're seeing within the space, challenges that you might be facing currently with your impact reporting, requests that you might be getting from some of your stakeholders, right, of things that they want to see. And that what's great about this is those questions and those challenges aren't going to be unique to you. They probably impact everybody on this call. So I'm going to quickly run through the chat to see if any questions came in that I might have missed. So baseline grant size for this reporting framework, 0, right? Absolutely 0. I'm going to give you again a story. There's a scholarship program that we work with that has 12 submissions, right? And before working with Reviewr, they found two of their submissions that went to a spam filter, right? So like 15% of their applicants never even got reviewed. So size is by no means a limitation for these programs. It's all about, we're doing these programs for a reason. We have to be able to back up and say we achieved our mission, right? Otherwise, why are we doing these grant programs? Um, I would say that the smaller the grant, the impact tracking becomes slightly easier. And I think it's easier for you to start to implement some of these metrics. It's probably a smaller number of people as well. But I think at the end of the day, if you apply for grant funding, you need to be able to report back to us how the funds were used and was it successful or not. And so if I go back to this slide over here, that's why I think that this second bullet point here, the quarterly reviews are critical because that's how you can start to uncover potential problem areas or challenges, help align them with resources from there. And again, no dollar amount is too small. That dollar was fundraised, right? So you still have to be able to show back ROI on it. And as I'm waiting for more questions to come in, like literally this dashboard is why this conversation came to play because you had back in January, like literally, and some of you may be on the call here that were impacted by this, that you relied very, very heavily on federal grants, right? And so when this memo went out that said, hey, look, we're going to cut off funding to these types of programs and you're left hanging dry, like what type of ammunition do you have to fight for your program? Right. And that's like an open-ended question. Like, what ammo do you have to go back and say, look, like you can't cut our program because we've been able to do all these incredible things. So to be able to pull these types of dashboards and have the data at your fingertips to say, we've awarded $4.25 million in funding, and that in itself has created 142 jobs. Like, if that doesn't tell a compelling story, I don't know what does. And if you were to lose funding, again, this is broad, high level, right? Maybe you're not relying on federal funds. How do you then go to a private donor or how do you go to a corporation who has a corporate social responsibility campaign, say, for example, for healthcare, and say, look, we're raising funding because we just lost funds from the feds. Here's what we've been able to do over the last 3 years. Just imagine what we can do with additional funding and not only what we can do, but here's how we can prove that we have the ability to do it with your funds. Other questions, again, I can answer. And again, these questions can be quite broad, right? They can be about the platform, they can be about impact tracking, they can be about things that you're seeing, in the daily operations, whatever it is that you want to share that you think other people might benefit from. Yeah, so great question. So the comment that came in is like, you're saying exaggerating impact. You're basically saying like with a $15,000 grant, the grantees are struggling to report back to you the actual impact that they're having or moving the needle. I think that actually goes hand in hand with your setting the expectations and like what your grant application's for, right? So I assume you have some type of mission and vision that you operate off of, right? You're funding these projects for a reason. So because of that, you can now go back and say, look, if we're going to cut you this $15,000 check because your project aligns with whatever mission and vision we have, how do you want to report back on impact? Like, what are you going to do with this fund? Like, it's as simple as asking, like, what is it that you're going to do? And that's how you hold them accountable. And the proof in moving the needle isn't by one person, right? It's like investing. So we work with a lot of like venture capitalists here at Reviewr who use us for like their competitions. Like you might fund 10 different projects and like it's okay if three or four of them potentially fail, right? Like we don't want to see it happen. It's also where like that quarterly reporting comes into play. So how can we catch it early before they do fail? But it only requires two of them to provide a substantial impact, right? That kind of moves the overarching needle. So it's not about individual success stories. That goes back to if I go back to my slide deck here, way earlier on, the and this evidence trap here. right? Relying solely on success stories than systematic data. So if you've got, six or seven different organizations that you funded $15,000 a piece, those collectively absolutely do move the needle. And again, you funded them for a reason. So for you specifically, like how do you define what that reason was? Um, Use Foundin. How would this be used within that software? Great question. Probably won't be, right? Because we're not Foundin. The goal here is to try to leverage Reviewr. What I would tell you is that grant reporting obviously isn't unique to Reviewr. So, if you want to explore using Reviewr, that'd be great. What I would do though is I would start to implement some of these forms, ideally within Foundin. I quite frankly have no idea what their grant reporting looks like. I assume that they should be able to advise you, otherwise they may not be the best partner. Um, but within Found It, you've obviously gone through a grant making process, reach back out to the grantees. They've probably already done some type of acceptance packet for you, so you can skip over that and get them into some type of quarterly assessments, right? Start collecting data. Just the answer is just start. Get them to summarize activities, have them report back to you some of the different milestones. Annual reporting obviously is much more important just because it's like a collective between all of them. How you get that data out of Foundant, how they aggregate that, that's something that you're gonna have to talk to them about. I wish I could do more for you, but I'm sorry, I can't. Do we integrate with Salesforce? Yeah. So Salesforce is obviously an incredible database. It's meant to be like the tr record of truth is what I'm trying to say. So the idea is to ideally leverage a dedicated grant management software for applications, review and selection, ongoing communication, metric tracking, and then basically log these data sets or these data points on their account within Salesforce. So Salesforce serves as like the record of truth, but Reviewr or Founded or whatever platforms that you're using serve as like the operational hubs. Other questions? And like I said, I will hang out for as long as you guys want today. So whatever value I can do. As I'm waiting for more questions, what we're going to end up doing here, and it won't be today since it's already almost 3 o'clock. We will take this recording and we're going to convert it into a bit more actionable. So like an article. We'll kind of break through like some of the different components that go into grant impact reporting. I'm also going to include all of these different sample reports here. Again, this was intended to be high level. Now, for some of you, you can take these and literally implement them tomorrow. I would say for the vast majority of you, you're going to scale some things back. You might reword some things. Unless your program has never launched yet, you already have existing data from your grantees. And so you have to rework these to match the data that you're already collecting from them. So we'll share some of those back out to you guys as well. So keep an eye out for that follow-up. Other questions? Going back to both like the founding question and the Salesforce question, again, like those are different platforms. I think every platform out there has its own unique value proposition. I would say going back to this page, I think it's critical for you to have the entire life cycle of your grants in one centralized place. But I think that like the concept of a profile can't be understated. It goes back to what I talked about earlier on that we far too often look at these programs as a pure data perspective. And I'm kind of like contradicting myself here because like I talked about how like without applicant data and them self-reporting, like you physically can't do grant impact reporting. But these are very people organizational centric programs. And so the idea behind a profile is at least initially like building out the persona of who the grantee is or who the applicant is. And then forever and ever storing all of their actions with you. So again, in this case, I have the organization, their initial application. I've got every file upload they ever submitted. I've got every piece of communication ever logged. I have their review and selection process logged within here. And then again, the supplemental form section is what we talked about today. It's the core piece to this is having a centralized place where the grantees can go on a timeline, click add, and just continue to add and add and add. And once they've uploaded all their deliverables from day one to day 361 or whatever that timeline looks like, because it's all logged in one spot, that makes reporting feasible, right? If you have found it as your application system, but then you started to use spreadsheets for managing budgets, and then you have all of their deliverables in Google Drive, that's when you're going to run into pretty severe challenges. Again, going back to the sheet here, that would be like your integrated systems and then your process fragmentation. That's where reporting becomes literally impossible. So for those of you who are kind of early on in this process, or if you're using multiple platforms, your first task isn't necessarily to implement these reporting frameworks. It's more so centralizing your processes, and then from there you can start to implement your ongoing data collection. Other questions today? I am going to drop a message here in the chat just for fun. Basically, who has like an existing impact report like on a physical dashboard or in a system, right? So like who has a system in place for collecting these ongoing data points and then a way for your team to actually go and access it, visualize, and then make decisions off. I'm just kind of curious. And you can leave an emoji like a thumbs up or thumbs down, whatever it might be. Good. Like I said, I'll hang out for as long as you guys want until the questions start to dry up. Okay. We're approaching an hour now, so we went pretty long. Hopefully, there's some type of raw takeaway or tangible benefit that you guys got that you can apply to your programs. Keep an eye out for that follow-up. And again, being that we are so resource education driven, we'll kind of keep you guys in our thoughts as we do other webinars. We do articles, we do all sorts of education campaigns, and so as we hear things, it'll be the first one to know for us. One last kind of question did come in around suggestions on how to socialize a new reporting system with staff? Yeah, hey, that's a great question. So I didn't talk about it, but that was actually one of the challenges on here under organizational resistance, and it could be a lack of resources, right? Taking on more projects is hard. This is not what you're asking, but it is something that I often see is potentially a reluctance to measure impact this way because we may not like the results. And that's a hard statement to make, right? Like, how do we look ourselves in the mirror and say, hey, you know what? Maybe we really aren't having the impact that we want. Or if we don't have the data, we really want to kind of know like what's in Pandora's box. So that's kind of a self-reflection thing for you guys. What I would say is it's important to prioritize it amongst your staff. While it might just be another task, like none of us are here just to go through the motions. And so to do things right, sometimes it's important to take on those tasks and reprioritize what we're working against. Um, Not to like give you like a scare story that you can give your team, but like you very well could say like, what happens if we overnight lost funding? Like it went to zero. Like what is the game plan to raise funds, engage with our current donors? Do we have the proof in place to go to them to raise funds and things like that? And I think that in itself will open eyes pretty quickly. Um, you don't want to be operating blind. So that really is my suggestion is just to stress the importance of it, that if we're going to be doing these types of programs because they make up our mission and our vision, then we have to have something in place to track the impact that we're having. as well as spearhead future initiatives because you only know what you know, right? And I think that a lot of times we start to unpack like maybe our grants should be larger, or maybe they should be smaller, but we should fund more people, right? Things like that. It's okay too. Maybe each year we don't actually do new grants, right? So I'm going to make up a number. If you have a $500,000 grant at whatever number you want to think through, like maybe we don't open up a new call for applications in 2025. Maybe instead we look at our projects that we've already funded and figure out, do any of them need follow-up funding because they didn't quite cross the finish line yet. And without having this data, we're operating blind and we really can't make those decisions. I'm going to add one more note to that as well. So implementing this framework is not challenging, right? We're making assumptions that you're using a platform like Reviewr or another vendor that has the ability to collect ongoing data from the grantees. So that in itself necessarily isn't challenging. What becomes challenging is getting the applicants to submit stuff to you, right? Because without their self-reporting, you're still not going to have any success. Again, that's more of like a system thing. So having like the acceptance packets in place. What is challenging though is the consolidation of all of the grant reporting templates into these dashboards. And so again, making an assumption that you partner with the right organization, like it's really as simple as loading up the forms and having people fill it out. And these dashboards are preloaded for you where your team really isn't taking on more work. Um, I'll leave it at that. There was one thing I wanted to address on that. Um, yeah, more on their plate. Um, Yeah, so again, just leveraging the right tools where they're really not taking on more stuff. It's more so having a system that will do it for you. Because to your point, like you physically can't be doing that. Oh, that's where I was going to go. So, where taking on more on your plate may become an issue is what if you want to jump way ahead? So if I pull this example here, like what if you want to be able to pull like the last 10 years of grant making activity? That's where like you need to dig through your archives and figure out like what projects you've already funded, what data do you already have? Do you have to reach back out to people and have them submit those follow-ups? And then how do you then start to aggregate, 10 years of historical data that's not in a system into a new one? So to answer that question, I would say that can be a project over time. Let's just start now for people moving forward. Okay. Um, if there's no more questions, like I said, we've been on here for about an hour now. We'll go ahead and wrap it up. Keep an eye out for that follow-up. And as always, if there's anything I can ever do for you, if you want to explore Reviewr, let me know. If there's other potential challenges that you don't want to bring up here in chat, which I totally understand, you want to talk more personal about those, happy to do so. At the end of the day, again, while we provide a software and a solution, I've seen virtually everything, and so I'm happy to bounce ideas off of it. So I appreciate everybody attending today and your participation and keep an eye out for that follow-up.